The dust hung in the air over the Tucson arena like memory. October 1959, Pioneer Days Festival. Outside the city, on the edge of the Sonoran Desert, 600 people packed into wooden bleachers around a circle of dirt 50 feet across. Saguaro cactus on the horizon. Distant mountains turning red in the afternoon sun. The smell of horses, leather, and pipe tobacco. This was the Southwest's biggest Western festival. People came from Texas, from New Mexico, from California. Ranchers in their best work clothes. Old cowhands with weathered faces. Tourists who wanted a taste of the real West before it disappeared. They came for the rodeo, for the cattle auction, for the parades. But they really came for one thing. They came to see Texas Slade. Slade was 38 years old, 6'2", lean as a fence post. His face was carved from sandstone, sharp cheekbones, thin black mustache, dark eyes that didn't blink. He wore all black. Black shirt with silver buttons. Black leather vest with silver conchos. Black trousers tucked into polished black boots. Black wide-brimmed hat. 2 ivory-handled revolvers strapped to his hips in hand-tooled leather holsters that cost more than most men made in a year. Texas Slade was the undefeated quick-draw champion of the Southwest. 87 consecutive victories. Never beaten. Never tied. Never even close. He had drawn faster than every gunfighter, ranger, and trick shooter who had stepped onto a dirt arena from El Paso to San Bernardino. The fastest of them had drawn in 0.22 seconds. Slade's record was 0.9. That was a number that sat on the edge of human ability. The average human reaction time, when you accounted for hearing the bell, processing the sound, and sending the signal to the muscles, was 0.25 seconds. Olympic sprinters at peak training cleared 0.3. Slade was operating in a zone that didn't seem possible. He had been timed by stopwatches, then by movie cameras at 24 frames per second, then by a Stanford professor with a pneumatic trigger and an electronic clock. The professor walked away shaking his head. Slade earned $40,000 a year doing exhibitions. That was more money than the governor of Arizona made. He had photographers following him. A book deal in negotiation. A man at MGM was talking about a film. He was going to be the next Roy Rogers, only real. The promoter climbed the dirt-covered platform in the center of the arena. He was a heavy man in a grey suit and a bowler hat, sweating through his shirt. He raised the megaphone to his mouth. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, "the moment you've been waiting for. The undefeated quick-draw champion of the Southwest. 87 victories. Never beaten. $5,000 to any man in this crowd brave enough to face him." $5,000 cash money, the crowd murmured. $5,000 in 1959 was real money. A new pickup truck cost $2,000. A small house cost $10,000. A working ranch hand made $300 a month if he was lucky. $5,000 could change a man's life. But nobody moved, because everyone in the crowd knew about Slade. Everyone knew his record. Everyone knew that nobody had ever come close. $5,000 wasn't worth being humiliated in front of 600 people. Wasn't worth being added to Slade's highlight reel. Wasn't worth being the 88th name on his list. The promoter waited. Nobody moved. Slade walked to the center of the platform, pulled both his ivory-handled revolvers, spun them in his hands, holstered them, drew them again so fast the eye couldn't follow, reholstered, smiled. "Easy money, gentlemen," he called out. 5,000 cash. "All you have to do is beat me. 1 round, 1 draw. That's it." Anybody. Silence. A woman in the third row laughed nervously. A child somewhere cried. A horse stamped in a stall behind the stands. Slade's smile widened. He stepped down off the platform, started walking through the bleachers. The crowd parted for him like water around a rock. He was a head taller than most men there. His boots made hollow sounds on the wooden boards. His revolvers shone in the afternoon sun. "What's the matter, friends?" he called out as he walked. "Is there no man here?" 600 people. "No man among you?" He walked along the front row, pointed at a young rancher. "You big strong man. $5,000, easy." The young rancher shook his head, looked at his boots. Slade laughed. He kept walking. He pointed at an old hand with white whiskers. "You, sir. You look like you've drawn a pistol or two in your time." The old man held up his hands, smiled, shook his head. "No takers, sir. No takers." Slade kept walking. Up the steps. Into the bleachers. He walked along row 5. Row 6, row 7. He stopped at row 8. He scanned the faces. He was looking for something. He didn't quite know what. Maybe a tourist who didn't know any better. Maybe a drunk. Maybe someone whose pride was bigger than his sense. His eyes settled on a man sitting alone. The man was older. Maybe 50, maybe more. Hard to tell. He had a weathered face the color of old saddle leather. Deep lines around his eyes. Broad shoulders. He wore a plain, light-colored work shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. A dark brown vest unbuttoned. Dark wool trousers. A brown leather gun belt with a single, plain holster on his right hip. Brown work boots dusty from the road. A worn, dark brown felt cowboy hat that had seen 1,000 suns. Nothing about the man stood out. He looked like every rancher who had ever walked across the Arizona territory. He sat with his hands resting on his thighs. He was watching the arena with steady, focused eyes. Slade pointed. "You, sir," in the brown vest. "Stand up." The old man didn't move at first, just looked at Slade, took a breath. The crowd around him turned and stared. The men next to him whispered something. He shook his head once. Then he stood up slowly, like a man whose knees had been telling him they were tired for a long time. He stood at his full height. 6'4". He was bigger than people had thought when he was sitting. The crowd went quiet. The old man started walking down the bleacher steps. Slade smiled, started walking back to the platform, already counting his next victory in his head. The old man walked across the dirt arena. His boots kicked up little puffs of dust. He walked with the slow, even gait of a man who had ridden horses for a long time. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Slade. He looked at the dirt in front of him. He stopped at the edge of the arena circle, 20 paces from Slade. The promoter walked over with the megaphone. "In there," the promoter said. "What's your name?" The old man looked at the megaphone, then looked at the promoter. He had eyes that had been a lot of places. "John Wayne," he said, quiet, calm. The promoter blinked. He waited for a laugh or a wink, or some sign that this was a joke. The old man's face didn't change. "Pardon me, sir." "Could you repeat that?" "John Wayne." The promoter looked at the crowd. Some people were laughing. Some were leaning forward. A woman in the front row had her hand over her mouth. The promoter looked back at the old man. Are you really John Wayne?" "I am." The promoter cleared his throat, spoke into the megaphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our volunteer is—" He hesitated. "Mr. John Wayne." The crowd reacted in 3 waves. First confusion, then disbelief, then recognition. People stood up to look. Hats came off. Murmurs turned to gasps. Some people clapped. Others just stared. But Slade stood in the middle of the arena, with both hands resting on his ivory revolvers. His smile didn't move. "John Wayne," Slade said. Loud enough for the crowd to hear. The movie star. "Yes, sir. You came down here to face me. You called for a volunteer." "I volunteered. You know who I am." "I do. You know my record. I heard." Slade laughed. The laugh was easy, confident. "Mr. Wayne, with all respect, you're an actor. You play a cowboy on the screen. I've spent 20 years drawing this iron. There's a difference between pretending to be a gunfighter and being one." The crowd held its breath. John Wayne nodded slowly. He didn't look offended. He didn't look proud. He looked the same as he had in the bleachers, steady, calm. "That may be true," he said, "but you asked for a volunteer. You said any man. I'm a man. I'm here." Slade's smile got a little harder around the edges. "Are you sure you want to do this, sir?" In front of all these people. "I'm sure. $5,000 if you beat me. Nothing if you don't. I understand. And you understand that if I beat you fast enough, the camera might not catch it. The crowd might think you didn't even try. Might be embarrassing for a man with your reputation. I'll take the risk." The promoter looked between them. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the horses in the stalls seemed to have stopped moving. "Are we proceeding?" the promoter asked. "We are," Slade said. "I am," Wayne said. The promoter retreated to the edge of the arena. He raised the megaphone with shaking hands. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 rounds. Best of 3. The first to draw and aim wins the round. The first to win 2 rounds wins the match. The bell signals the start of each round. Are the gentlemen ready? Slade nodded. Wayne nodded. The arena was silent. The bell rang. Slade's hand moved, faster than the eye. The ivory-handled revolver was out of its holster, leveled, pointed at Wayne's chest, before Wayne's hand had cleared his belt. The crowd gasped. The promoter held up his arm. Round 1 to Slade. Slade smiled, holstered his revolver in a smooth backhand spin. Don't take it personally, Mr. Wayne. 87 men have stood where you stand. None of them won, Wayne nodded. He didn't move from his position. His right hand hung loose at his side, near his holster. He was watching Slade with his deep-set eyes. His face hadn't changed expression once. The bell rang. Slade's hand moved, so did Wayne's. The 2 revolvers came up at the same time, pointed at each other from 20 paces. Both men with their guns level. Both arms extended. The dust hadn't even started to lift. The promoter stared. He didn't know what to say. Round 2, tie, the crowd erupted. 600 people on their feet, shouting, pointing. The men who had laughed were no longer laughing. The women who had covered their mouths now had their hands on their hearts. Slade's smile was gone. He holstered his revolver slowly. He looked at Wayne. Wayne holstered his own. Looked back at Slade, said nothing. That was lucky, Slade said. Loud enough for the crowd to hear. But the edge in his voice betrayed him. Maybe, Wayne said. The promoter cleared his throat. The 3rd round will be the deciding round. Are the gentlemen ready? Slade nodded. Wayne nodded. The arena was so quiet you could hear a hawk crying somewhere over the desert. The bell rang. The thing about a quick draw, the thing the spectators didn't always understand, was that it wasn't really about speed. It was about stillness. The fastest gunfighter in the world wasn't the one whose hand moved fastest. It was the one whose mind moved least. The one whose body did what it needed to do without thinking about it. The one who had drilled the motion 10,000 times until the motion drilled itself. The hand had to move before the mind asked it to. The bell ring traveled through the air at the speed of sound. It hit Slade's ears. His ears sent the signal to his brain. His brain decoded the signal as the start signal. His brain sent the signal to his hand. His hand moved. That whole chain took 0.22 seconds for Slade. It took 0.18 for John Wayne. Nobody saw the draw. Not the camera. Not the crowd. Not Slade. There was the bell. There was a blur. There was a click of metal on leather. And then there was the silence. Slade was standing in his stance. His right hand was on the grip of his ivory revolver. The revolver was halfway out of its holster, stopped, frozen. His eyes were wide. 20 paces away, John Wayne stood with his right arm extended. His single dark steel revolver was pointed at Slade's heart. Steady as a stone wall, the arena was silent for what felt like a long time. The promoter didn't move. The crowd didn't breathe. John Wayne lowered his revolver slowly. He did not spin it. He did not flourish it. He slid it back into its plain leather holster on his right hip. He let his hand fall to his side. Texas Slade looked down at his half-drawn revolver, looked at his hand, looked at the dirt, looked at Wayne. His ivory revolver fell out of his fingers, hit the dirt with a soft thump. He took off his black hat, held it against his chest. He bowed his head. He bowed it deep, the way a man bows when he understands. The crowd stayed silent. Then a single voice in the back yelled, "My God," and then 600 people stood up. The applause came in like a wave. It rolled across the arena. It hit the bleachers and bounced back. It went on. And on and on. Hats came off. Men cried. The woman in the front row was sobbing into a handkerchief. A child somewhere yelled, "He won, Daddy!" He won. John Wayne stood in the middle of the arena. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He didn't bow. He just stood there with his hands at his sides. His face was the same as it had been when he was sitting in the bleachers. The same as it had been before the bell rang, steady, calm. The promoter walked across the arena holding a leather satchel. The satchel was heavy. It was filled with stacked $100 bills. $5,000 in cash. He held it out to Wayne. Wayne looked at the satchel. He shook his head once. "Mr. Wayne, the money is yours. You won." "Give it to him!" The promoter's mouth opened. "Sir!" "Give it to him." Wayne nodded toward Slade, who was still standing with his head bowed and his hat against his chest. "He's been doing this his whole life. I just got lucky." "Sir, with respect." "That wasn't luck." "Give it to him." The promoter looked at Slade. Slade had raised his head and was looking at Wayne with an expression nobody in the crowd could read. Wayne walked over to Slade. He stopped in front of him. He was a head taller than Slade now somehow, even though Slade was the taller man on paper. Wayne held out his right hand. "You're a hell of a gunfighter, Mr. Slade." Slade looked at the hand. He looked at Wayne's face. "You let me have round two," Slade said. Quiet, just for Wayne to hear. Wayne didn't answer. "You drew at the same speed on purpose. You wanted me to think I had a chance." Wayne still didn't answer. "Why?" "Because you've got a reputation," Wayne said. Quiet. "And reputations are hard to build." "I didn't come down here to take yours. I came down here because you asked." Slade stared. "You could have humiliated me." "I could have. Why didn't you?" Wayne thought about it. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the desert. He looked at Slade. "Because a man's name is the only thing he really owns. I won't take a man's name from him for sport." Slade closed his eyes. He took a long breath. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. He took Wayne's hand. He shook it. He bowed his head one more time. "It was an honor, Mr. Wayne." "The honor was mine, Mr. Slade." Wayne picked up Slade's ivory revolver from the dirt, brushed it off with his sleeve, handed it back. Slade took it, slid it into his holster. Then John Wayne turned, walked across the arena, walked through the gate, walked down the dirt path to the parking area, and got into a dusty 1956 Ford pickup truck. Drove away, alone. He didn't take the $5,000. He didn't sign autographs. He didn't pose for photographs. He just left. The reporters who were at the festival that day wrote about it in the next morning's newspapers. They got most of it wrong. The Tucson Daily Citizen ran a headline that said, "Wayne beats quick draw champ in public exhibition." The Arizona Republic ran a piece that focused on the $5,000 Wayne had refused. The Los Angeles Times sent a man down to interview Slade 2 weeks later. The man asked Slade what had happened. Slade was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I learned something." "What did you learn?" "That I'm not the fastest man alive." "And I learned that the fastest man alive doesn't care if anybody knows." "Are you going to retire?" "No, I'm going to get better." "Did you ever find out where Wayne learned to shoot like that?" "I asked around," Slade said. "Some people say he trained with Yakima Canutt for years. Some say he hired a champion to teach him for the films. Some say he just had it. I don't know. I don't think it matters." "Why not?" Slade looked at the reporter, smiled a little. "Because the speed wasn't the point." "What was the point?" "He could have humiliated me. He chose not to. That was the point." The reporter wrote it down. Wrote a piece about it. The piece ran on page 9 of the Sunday edition. Most people didn't read it. But the people who were there that day in Tucson never forgot. Years later, Texas Slade retired from the exhibition circuit. He opened a small ranch outside of Sonora. He took on students, young men who wanted to learn the quick draw. He taught them for 40 years. He charged them almost nothing. Every one of his students heard the story. He told them about the day a 60-year-old-looking man in a worn brown vest stood up out of the bleachers in Tucson, Arizona. He told them about the first round. He told them about the second round. He told them about the third round. He told them about the leather satchel of cash. He told them about the handshake. And then he told them what he had learned. "The fastest gun in the West," he would say, "isn't the one with the fastest hand. It's the one with the steadiest mind. And the steadiest mind doesn't need to win." He died in 1994. He was 73 years old. His students carried his casket. They put his ivory-handled revolvers in the ground with him. They put a small bronze plaque on his headstone. The plaque said, 87 victories, 1 lesson. His students still tell the story. They tell it to their students. The story has been passed down for 66 years now. It has changed in the telling. Some versions say Wayne drew in 0.10 seconds. Some versions say Wayne knocked Slade unconscious. Some versions say there were 1,000 people in the bleachers, or 2,000, or 10,000. None of those versions are correct. The correct version is the simple one. There were 600 people. The bell rang 3 times. A man stood up out of the bleachers. He drew faster than the fastest gunfighter in the Southwest. He gave the prize money to the man he had beaten. He shook his hand. He drove away. That's the story. That's the whole story. There was a man sitting next to John Wayne in row 8, an old rancher in a grey work shirt. He had not known who Wayne was when Wayne sat down. He had only known that this old fellow with the brown vest had a quiet way about him. After the bell rang the 3rd time, after the applause died, after Wayne walked out of the arena, the old rancher sat back down. He stayed sitting in the bleachers for a long time. Most of the crowd had cleared out. The sun was lowering. The desert was turning red. The old rancher's grandson sat next to him. The boy was about 10. He had been watching the whole thing with his eyes wide. "Grandpa," the boy said, "did you see that?" "I saw it. Was that real?" "It was real. How did he do it?" The old rancher took off his hat, looked at it, put it back on. He had been a working hand for 57 years. He had seen a lot of men. He had seen good ones and bad ones, fast ones and slow ones, brave ones and cowards. He had thought he had seen all the kinds of men there were. He hadn't seen this kind. Not until today. "Boy," he said, quiet, "that wasn't about the gun." "What was it about?" The old rancher thought for a long time. "The mountain doesn't have to prove it's tall," he said finally. "The river doesn't have to prove it's strong. They just are. The man who has to prove what he is isn't yet what he says he is. The man who doesn't have to prove anything has already become it." The boy didn't quite understand. He was 10 years old. 10-year-old boys don't always understand things like that. But he remembered. He remembered for the rest of his life. He told his own grandchildren about it. He told them the story of the day he saw John Wayne stand up out of the bleachers in Tucson. He told them the story of the leather satchel and the handshake. He told them what his grandfather had said about the mountain and the river. And his grandchildren told their grandchildren. The story is still being told. Some of the details may have changed in the years since. Some of the witnesses may have remembered things that didn't happen. Some of the words may have been put in mouths they weren't said by. The story may not be exactly true, the way the newspapers report things. The story may be a little bit something else. Something older than facts. But the lesson is true. The lesson has been true for as long as men have stood face to face in the dirt of the West. You don't have to win to be the fastest. You only have to know you don't need to. October 1959, Tucson, Arizona. 600 witnesses. 3 rounds. 1 handshake. 1 leather satchel of cash refused. 1 pickup truck driving off into the desert with the sun lowering behind it. That was the day Texas Slade learned what real speed looked like. That was the day 600 people remembered the rest of their lives. That was the day John Wayne came down to a dirt arena in the desert, did what nobody thought he could do, and then left without the money. He didn't need the money. He didn't need the applause. He didn't need the headline. He didn't need anything. Because the mountain doesn't need anything. The river doesn't need anything. They just are.